Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So, Steve Shives has played a major part in this series so far, and I was planning to not focus on Steve in this particular episode. But just before I started writing this script, I see Steve has put out a vid which relates to what I was going to say. He just keeps jumping the shark and giving me more material. So here's the clip.
Adam Rainstopper. Hey Steve, I recently saw a comment on a video about Bill Cosby that read something to the effect of, if Cosby was a white conservative, he would be hanged. Does anyone actually believe this? I mean, there are tons of people who come up with excuses and apologetics to cover the gulf in sentencing between white and, for instance, black offenders of the same age, from similar economic backgrounds, with similar criminal histories, who stand convicted of the same offense. However, I occasionally run into someone who just outright denies it, and even claims that white people are handed harsher punishments under similar circumstances, and that white conservatives, in a country that is predominantly white and overwhelmingly conservative in centers of power, are being systematically persecuted. How does this happen? Can these people ever be reached? I wouldn't want to say that you can't ever reach any of those people, but I would say it's probably a waste of time to spend too much energy trying to reach any one particular individual who is of that mindset. I think the best thing to do if you care about reaching those people is to present the best, strongest, most persuasive possible case you can for your position, and put it out there and hope that you'll reach those that are reachable in that way. Because the truth is, if you are at the point where you're just flat out denying that that particular kind of discrimination exists, then you're probably not reachable, at least not at that point, or at least you're not receptive to hearing the truth. Because the truth is, that kind of discrimination that you describe specifically, white person, black person, similar histories, convicted of the same crime, white person gets off relatively easy, black person gets harsh sentence. That kind of thing exists. That's real, you know. And you can't explain that away by appealing to any other factor. You can't say, well, it's because black people commit more crimes. It's an apples to apples comparison, and disproportionately black folks get harsher sentences than white folks convicted of the same crime. That's just the way it is. And there's no escaping that. And I think that's why folks who are invested either emotionally or politically or for some other reason in pushing this false narrative that systemic racial discrimination doesn't exist, and it's certainly not a part of our justice system, that's why they'll avoid mentioning that. And if it's brought up to them, they'll ignore it or they'll deny it. Because what else can they do? What else can they do? There's no other explanation for that other than racist discrimination exists in the justice system. And if your argument is no, it doesn't, then you can't deal with what you were talking about in that question.
Now, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in fate, but it's kind of spooky that I should see that just before starting this vid. So let's get stuck into it. I remember being asked once, politely in a comment section of a video on another channel, if I'm against social justice. Not the social justice movement or social justice warriors, but social justice in general. And the answer is no. This of course depends on how you define social justice. In its most simplistic form, and let me stress, its most basic simplistic form, I agree with the concept. I'm against racism, and I'm against sexism, and I believe everyone, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, religious belief or lack of religious belief, or political viewpoint, should have equal political and social rights. And this is exactly why I'm an anti-SJW. In fact, the social justice movement is the cause of the recent rise of white supremacists. I know that might seem like a strange statement to some, but stick with me for a minute or two and you'll see what I mean. Social justice claims to be about equality for all, but their ideology actually prevents this, as I'll show. Their worldview limits them to only promoting equality under certain circumstances and only for certain groups. We see this with the redefinition of racism and sexism. So now such terms can only be used in relation to power and prejudice. Let me explain why this is bullshit. Imagine a stereotypical racist, the worst you can imagine.
Like me!
No, I mean a white supremacist, not someone who hates whites. Sorry, Steve. Imagine a white guy who was a member of the KKK. He goes out every Saturday night with a group of friends in bed sheets and they burn crosses. This is their idea of a good time. You get the idea. This guy climbs the ranks of the KKK over time and becomes an Imperial Cyclops or Grand Dragon or whatever the fuck stupid name they have. And this racist piece of shit writes a book called The White Man is Superior to the Nigger. Now, I have a simple question. Is this guy and his statement racist? I would say, without a doubt, yes. The dictionary definition of racism would agree with me. And so would the social justice definition. So far so good. But the racist in the example sells enough books to buy a plane ticket to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has a population of over 78 million. Out of that 78 million, there are 60,000 whites of European heritage, which means the racist KKK member is now a minority. In fact, he is more of a minority than the African Americans in the US. He has neither power nor privilege based on his race, and his views are likely to get him prosecuted by the government or attacked by locals. So, while living in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, he makes exactly the same claims, word for word, that he did in America. He says, the white man is superior to the...
nigga this, nigga please, nigga, can you lend a nigga a pencil?
Simple question. Is this guy and his statement racist? I would still say yes. The dictionary definition of racism would still agree, but suddenly the social justice definition would say that he and his statement aren't racist. As his race is not in a position of power and influence, he can no longer be racist towards blacks, which sounds crazy, considering what he's saying. But we all know that somehow the SJWs would make an excuse, would somehow find a reason to contradict their own definition, and still declare him racist anyway. And that's because they don't actually believe in their definition. They only use it as an excuse to make racism and sexism flow in one direction. Only whites can be racist towards non-whites, and only males can be sexist towards females, in their point of view. This allows the so-called champions against racism and sexism to be racist and sexist towards certain groups, and they interpret the entire world through this lens. So let's return to Steve from the start of this video.
Because the truth is, that kind of discrimination that you describe specifically, white person, black person, similar histories, convicted of the same crime, white person gets off relatively easy, black person gets harsh sentence. That kind of thing exists. That's real, and you can't explain that away by appealing to any other factor. You can't say, well, it's because black people commit more crimes. It's an apples to apples comparison, and disproportionately black folks get harsher sentences than white folks convicted of the same crime.
So here we see the social justice filter, which only allows people like Steve to see or acknowledge certain issues affecting certain groups. Now, I do partly agree with Steve. It is true that black men get longer sentences because they are black men. But Steve has focused on the word black and applied it to all African Americans.
It's an apples to apples comparison, and disproportionately black folks get harsher sentences than white folks convicted of the same crime.
While totally ignoring the bigger issue, and that's the men part of black men. It is true that adjusting for the crime and criminal history, that black men get longer sentences than white men, but white men get longer sentences than black women. In fact, as a group, men get longer sentences than women as a group. The gender sentencing gap is 8 times larger than the racial one. Simple question. If the racial sentencing gap is an issue, an injustice, then why isn't the gender sentencing gap? Why is it ignored by social justice warriors like Steve?
That's why they'll avoid mentioning that, and if it's brought up to them, they'll ignore it or they'll deny it, because what else can they do? What else can they do?
The answer is because they care more about their ideological worldview than injustices in society and actual equality. The goals of social justice, in their most basic interpretation, are noble, but their methods and ideology are harmful. We all agree that finding a cure for cancer is a noble cause, right? But someone selling you magical rocks to get rid of cancer demons is going to do more harm than good. Intentions are meaningless without beliefs based in reality and methods that actually work. But with many in the social justice crowd, I have to wonder if even their intentions are good.
Like me!
Let me give you another example. We hear constantly about African Americans being more likely to be shot and killed by cops.
And you won't ever have to wonder whether that cop is really there to help you or is he there to incarcerate you or kill you. It's important to understand that inequality is the big things like being shot and killed for no reason, but it's also the little things like being told your hairstyle is unacceptable or unkept just because your hair is different.
Once again, this isn't the full picture. We shouldn't be talking about African Americans in general, but African American men. In fact, we should probably just be talking about men in general, as they are shot and killed by cops at a far higher rate than females. Here is a list of the 2,805 people shot and killed by cops in America since the start of 2015. I've highlighted the females in the gender column. So we find that 123 females have been shot and killed by cops, which means 2,682 males have been killed. That means the percentage of females killed by cops is 4.5%. And out of the 2,805 people shot by cops, 685 were black, which is 24.4%. Now, African Americans make up 12.7% of the population. So, African Americans make up about 1/8 of the population, yet are 1/4 of the shooting deaths. Males make up roughly half the population, yet make up 95.6% of shooting deaths. And in case you're wondering, out of the 685 African Americans shot by police, 30 were female, which is 4.3%. Once again, the vast majority are male. Now, let's keep in mind that African Americans, like I just said, make up 12.7% of the population. Yet African American females make up 1.06% of shooting deaths. How can this not be seen as more of a gender issue than a race issue? Maybe we need to change hashtag Black Lives Matter to hashtag Male Lives Matter. So, if we are to conclude that the higher rate of black deaths are due to racism, shouldn't we also conclude that the higher rate of male deaths is due to sexism? But, instead of jumping to the conclusion that it must be sexism, we should instead ask some questions. Are males more likely to commit crimes? Are males more likely to carry weapons? Are males more likely to ignore instructions given by police? Are males more likely to react with hostility? Are police more likely to stop or question males? Are police more likely to see males as a possible threat? Are police more likely to react to males with deadly force? These are all questions that need to be explored and answered before we can say that the cause of the higher male death rate in police shootings is due to sexism against males. And it's possible, most likely in fact, that it's a combination of many different factors. For example, police might be more willing to react with deadly force to males, But maybe this is due to males being more willing to use violence towards police. Once again, let me stress, all these possibilities need to be explored and evaluated before we can determine what the cause or causes of the higher rate is. And exactly the same strategy should be used towards investigating the higher number of African American deaths. Are black males more likely to commit crimes? Are black males more likely to carry weapons? Are black males more likely to ignore instructions given by police? Are black males more likely to react with hostility? Are police more likely to stop or question black males? Are police more likely to see black males as a possible threat? Are police more likely to react to black males with deadly force? These are all things that need to be investigated before we can determine the cause of the higher rates. Yet SJWs automatically jump to the conclusion that it has to be racism in every single case, regardless of the circumstances. Now, it's an interesting thing when you point out to them that males as a group are also far more likely to be killed by cops.
I wouldn't want to say that you can't ever reach any of those people, but I would say it's probably a waste of time to spend too much energy trying to reach any one particular individual who is of that mindset. I think the best thing to do if you care about reaching those people is to present the best, strongest, most persuasive possible case you can for your position and put it out there and hope that you'll reach those that are reachable in that way. Because the truth is, if you are at the point where you're just flat out denying that that particular kind of discrimination exists, then you're probably not reachable.
They usually respond with something like, "But that's because males commit more violent crimes."
Yes, I mean, if you look at it, yes, men are more violent than women. Of the mass shootings we've had in the last 25 years, 88 have been by men, 2 have been by women. So we definitely have a problem with men in this country. Men are committing the murders.
Okay, well that is true. Of course, men commit the overwhelming majority of violent crimes. But I thought men and women were exactly the same. I mean, I'm kind of losing track of my feminist orthodoxies here, and I think some of them may be on a collision course about to hit each other. So men and women are exactly the same. You can transition from one to the other by snapping your fingers, and everyone has to believe that that's real. But they're totally different, which is true.
Women are better, unfortunately. We are not the murderers of our society. We are not committing the crimes. We commit less than 20% of the crimes. So that's actually, men are not as good as women. We are actually better. We're safer.
Now, it is true, there are far more males in prison than females. But just looking at the number of people in jail doesn't give you an accurate impression of who is committing more crimes, as males are far more likely to be sent to jail or get longer sentences than females who have committed comparable crimes with similar criminal histories, as we explored briefly earlier. Taking this into account, the numbers are in fact a lot closer than you might think. I explored this in a past video linked below. But even taking that into account, males still commit more crime, including violent crime, and there are reasons for this. Imagine you have a male and a female who both have a heroin addiction and need the exact same amount of money each day to score. The female is more likely to turn to prostitution, while the male is more likely to turn to crime, possibly violent crime. These options are largely the result of the different biology of males and females. And for the record, I'm not suggesting either option is good. But I'm willing to accept that one reason more men are in prison is because they commit more crime on average. Of course, this doesn't exclude discrimination when it comes to sentencing as another factor. In fact, it enforces it. If men are perceived as a group to be more dangerous and more criminal by nature, and women are perceived to be more innocent or part of the victim class, then this perception is going to affect the outcome of sentencing.
Okay. Does any of this strike you as nuts, or are you actually kind of tracking with this and nodding in agreement?
No, I completely agree. If you look at it, it doesn't matter what race they are, doesn't matter where they're from, doesn't matter what country. Men are committing most of the crimes and most of the murders. There is a problem with men. And no one can quite figure it out. Is it the testosterone? Is it that they feel less empowered? Are the minorities, are the women taking over too much and they are afraid of this?
Now, everything I said before that clip about males in general can be applied to black men specifically. SJWs will state that the reason for higher percentages of black males in prison or being shot by cops is because of racism, while anti-SJWs will sum this up as more black men committing more crime. And the truth actually lays somewhere in between those two positions. African Americans commit more crime on average, and this results in a stereotype which influences sentencing, creating an unconscious bias, or in some cases outright discrimination, which is exactly the same thing that happens to men in general when it comes to sentencing. Now, let's look at a clip from Thomas Smith.
When you end up looking at the statistics and you're looking at going, right, okay, so half of the crime is from black men, given a disproportionate number of the population, your only analysis of that is to say that that's racism, isn't it?
No, I think it's a product of a lot. There may be some outright racism somewhere along the chain. I think it's a product of a lot of unconscious biases for which we have data. It's a product of poverty, and that reinforces itself. So as we've arrested more men in the drug war and the way we've discriminated in our sentencing too, the 100-to-1 sentencing, we've put more black men in prison by astronomically more than white. That breaks up families, that creates poverty, that creates more crime.
Okay, that's a great point, because you say, right, we're putting more black men in prison, so yeah, but that's because they're the ones committing the crimes. The individual has to be responsible for their own agency. We can't just start letting black people
Can I just give you an example? What happens a lot of times, 95% of all prosecutors in this country are white men, 95%. And if you don't think that bias is affecting the outcome, prosecutorial discretion is one of the biggest tools for this discrimination.
Yeah, but you're saying
Now, Thomas makes an interesting point. He says that 95% of prosecutors are white males, and this is the reason African Americans get longer sentences. But this really misses the point. It's black men getting longer sentences, not black women. As we saw earlier, white men get longer sentences than black women. Or to be more accurate, all men, regardless of race, get longer sentences than all women, regardless of race. Now, it is true that African American men get hit twice, both with race and gender. But gender is actually the bigger factor. It's 8 times larger, in fact. Now, Thomas Smith tells us that he is a facts guy. That he's not about feelings or emotions, he's all about data and facts.
Demonstrate that white people are doing it.
It's a straw man. It's society is doing it. We have the data. I'm a data guy.
Yes,
see, you're a feelings person. You feel like there's no discrimination.
Are you insane?
Oh
my God!
My facts do not give a shit that you feel like there's no discrimination.
You have no principles.
Now, if Thomas Smith is a facts guy and really cares about equality and battling discrimination, then he would have to acknowledge that men also face gender discrimination, right? I mean, the gender sentencing gap is the perfect example of that. Let's have a look at 2 clips.
Do you think there's discrimination against women in our society?
I'm absolutely certain that there will be someone somewhere who is being discriminated against. Do you think there's discrimination against men in our society?
Not really.
Unbelievable. 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 How did gender...
Listen to all these identity politics people.
I don't know.
So if women are discriminated against this much, men this much, you don't care.
I don't care because I'm not a social engineer. I don't think, even, let's say, right, this...
So why would Tom dismiss men's issues despite the facts? I see there being 2 possibilities. The first is he knows about the gender sentencing gap, but doesn't really care about equality, and doesn't give a shit about men or our issues. The second possibility is he has never heard of the gender sentencing gap, Now, it is true that Thomas came across as an asshole in his talk with Sargon, but I don't believe the first option is the correct one. I believe it's far more likely Tom has just never heard of the sentencing gap, which brings up a number of interesting points. Firstly, he's not a facts guy like he thinks he is. Secondly, the social justice movement, which he is so eager to defend, has only given him limited information concerning only certain groups, which has shaped his opinion of the world. And thirdly, the hostility he has shown towards people like Sargon and our side in general limits him from listening to our points of view and then taking them on board, really considering that he might be wrong and that we might be right, and changing his opinion. Now, to be fair, I am basing this off his talk with Sargon, his talk with Baring, and his talk with Kevin Logan. He may be different on his podcast, I don't know. But even if that were the case, and he really is just concerned about equality for all, then the social justice movement has let him down, as it has fed him a biased narrative of half-truths instead of facts like he thinks it has. It has put blinders on him. It has limited his vision to only certain groups having issues based on an ideological worldview, and any claim that doesn't fit the narrative is automatically shot down.
I can't wait for 700 what about white men questions.
Now, this is a standard social justice dismissal tactic. If you're not talking about one of the pre-approved social justice groups, in other words, a racial minority or females or homosexuals or trans people, then they assume that you must be exclusively talking about white straight men. If you try to bring up the sentencing gap, which affects men in general, and you aren't specifically talking about black men, then the assumption is that you're only focusing on white straight men, the privileged white straight men who have no issues whatsoever, and you're just ignorant about the way the world really works, and you only care about those groups which, you know, really are overflowing with privilege, and you just want to keep things the way they've always been, with the white straight man on top oppressing everyone else. How dare you want to talk about men in general? It's only the black men or only the gay men that count, and not because they're men, but because they're black or because they're gay or because they're trans or whatever. The man part doesn't count. That's apparently not an issue, even when it is the major fucking issue, like in the sentencing gap and with being shot and killed by cops. This is why social justice is toxic. It doesn't really care about equality, it doesn't care about people being victims, it only cares about special interest groups. And for the record, before anyone strawmans me, I'm not advocating for only white straight men. When I talk about the sentencing gap, or men being shot and killed by cops at a higher rate, I'm talking about men in fucking general, regardless of race or sexuality. Now, could you imagine if feminists looked on their own issues this way? Let's pick a major feminist talking point, something like rape. And imagine if we insisted that feminists can't talk about rape affecting all women. They're only allowed to talk about it affecting black women, because black women are more oppressed than the white women. Those white women who have been raped, well, they're white, therefore they have privilege. And we should just exclude them from the conversation about rape altogether and just focus on the black women because they're far more oppressed. It's the bigger issue, and we can only deal with one issue at a time, right? Crazy fucking argument. But that's what we get from social justice warriors when they talk about men's issues. Now, speaking of racists, let's go back to Steve Shives.
Low-gravity logician. Hey, Steve, I have a question myself. What is your take on the 4chan poster campaign, the one with the "it's okay to be white" message? Many people across the nation are upset, and obviously college students. I've seen news reports stating that it's a racist statement, and others saying it very much isn't, despite the origin being the far right. Well, of course it's fucking racist. yes, it's racist. It's okay to be white. That presumes that there is a prevailing opinion that it's not okay to be white.
A prevailing opinion. Is there a prevailing opinion that it's not okay to be white? Well, the answer is most definitely in some sections of our community, just like there is a prevailing opinion that it's not okay to be gay in some areas of our society. So what are those areas? What's the areas of society where the prevailing opinion is that it's not okay to be white? Well, that would be within social justice circles, wouldn't it? In particular on university campuses. And where were those flyers left again? Oh, that's right, they were left on university campuses, weren't they? I'm sure that's just a coincidence, Steve, right? I'm sure they weren't trying to make a point about the attitudes which are prevailing on university campuses, thanks to people with opinions like yours. Next.
Which there isn't. It's just like all lives matter or white lives matter.
Yeah, what about male lives matter, Steve, considering that the vast majority of people shot by cops are in fact male? What do you think about that one? Male lives matter. Right, we can replace Black Lives Matter with Male Lives Matter because it's actually the bigger issue. Don't you think? No?
Or you will not replace us. It's white victimization, which is racist. It's perpetuating the false narrative that whiteness in and of itself is being attacked, that white people are being attacked and criticized and insulted and what have you for being white.
I can't wait for 700 what about white men questions.
That any time you try to call out or draw attention to or change white supremacy, that you are in fact attacking white people across the board for being white.
Well, the issue is, Steve, that you classify anything you don't like as being white supremacy. You and your friends are constantly calling groups that have nothing to do with white supremacists neo-Nazis and white supremacists, simply because you don't like them and they disagree with you. Neo-Nazi and white supremacist now means anyone Steve and friends disagrees with on any topic. It's basically lost all fucking meaning. And if you think that social justice warriors are only calling out white supremacists and not attacking white people in general, then you're fucking delusional or a liar.
That is racist. Yes. So the "it's okay to be white" message is a racist message being pushed to the benefit of racists who want to be racist without being called racist. Yes, of course. It's racist. Like me!
So what happens when you have a group of people that judge others based on the colour of their skin? Not on their words or their actions or their beliefs, but on the colour of their skin. And they demonise others based on the colour of their skin. They accuse them of being responsible for all the wrongs in the world. And even if an individual hasn't done any of those things, it's guilt by association based on nothing but the colour of their skin. And they exclude these people from having issues that are worthy of consideration and help based on the colour of their skin. Now the question is, who am I talking about? Am I talking about white supremacists or elements of the social justice movement?
Like me!
So it starts with the demonisation of whites by the social justice movement. And this has two effects. The first effect is it pushes some people towards the extreme, which is white supremacy. Now, to be fair, these people were probably already fairly in that camp, but it pushes them further in that direction. And the other effect it has is the people in the middle ground, the more reasonable people, start to defend themselves. They say, well, why the fuck should I take responsibility for something I haven't done based on nothing but the colour of my skin? Why does being white make me a bad person? Why does that make me responsible for all the evils in the world? Which is a perfectly reasonable position to take. But this in turn sparks the social justice movement to ramp things up even more. And they'll start calling the people in the middle ground white supremacists and neo-Nazis, and in turn those words start to lose any meaning. In the past, these words have been extremely strong and powerful words. They were words that you didn't want to be called because they're bad words. But when they're thrown around constantly for people who are basically doing nothing but defending themselves, they lose all meaning and start to become a joke. Suddenly they're not bad words anymore, because most of the time they're used incorrectly. Suddenly they don't have any weight anymore. And this in turn makes it easier for those who are heading towards the extreme, the white supremacy extreme, to do so, and to do so out in the open, which in turn sparks more activity on the social justice side. And the really sad fact is that extremism breeds extremism, and that goes for white supremacists and social justice. And the more extreme one side gets, the more extreme the other will become, and so on and so forth. Of course, most of us just sit in the centre and watch these two extremes and criticise them both, but Steve doesn't think we should do that. Steve doesn't like the central position, and that's a topic I'll bring up in a future video.
I use the humanist definition that defines evil as that which causes unnecessary suffering. Under that definition, the ringleaders of YouTube anti-feminism are evil. Their goal appears to be to cause unnecessary suffering and harm for their entertainment. Am I going too out of my way here? How do you define evil? And how does that word apply to the people who lie about your family? You would have to define the term evil in a very outside-of-the-box way in order for it to not apply to people who lie about my family. Or lie about other people's family, or as you say in your citing of the humanist definition, cause unnecessary suffering, particularly when it's done willfully for their own entertainment or their own profit, as YouTube anti-feminists and white supremacists, Islamophobes, xenophobes, the basic shitlord community. That's what they do. They attack and harass and abuse people and whip up anger and intolerance and hatred against groups of people that they view as worthy of attack, and they do this for their own entertainment because they think it's funny and because it makes them money. And yeah, I think that's evil. Is it as evil as murder? No, I wouldn't say it rises to that level. Is it as evil as child molestation? Certainly not, although it must be noted that a lot of the folks in that group seem to be pretty okay with child molestation, or at least with those who condone child molestation, as long as that person is more or less on their side of things. If it's a quote-unquote SJW who they catch a whiff of child molestation tolerance off of, well, then it's game over. Then it's all bets are off. That's a horrible, terrible, evil person. But if it's one of ours, well, let's try to find the nuance in his position,
You mean like your good friend FoxyJazzabelle, Steve, who has a habit of defending Hannibal the Victor? Remember Hannibal? Remember he was the guy that was convicted for attempted child rape? Do you remember him? Good friends with FoxyJazzabelle? Yeah. I guess that's not what you're talking about though, is it?
Yeah, do I think that YouTube anti-feminists meet the definition of evil? Do I think it is appropriate to use that term to refer to them in some sense? Absolutely. Fuck them. Fuck every last goddamn one of them. What they do certainly is evil, and it shouldn't be tolerated by this platform or any other platform. Unless they want to be a pro-evil platform, in which case, have at it.